Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the novel and Pi's religious beliefs and how he sort of practices three different belief systems at once. But I do want to talk a little bit more about the presence of atheism and agnosticism in that early part of the novel. So the presence of another kind of mentor figure in his life, Mr. Kumar, his biology teacher, will be sort of represent the presence of atheism in as a kind of juxtaposition against Pi's sort of strong religious beliefs. So we'll talk a little bit about that presence in the novel at the beginning. And then I do want to talk a little bit about what the significance of all this sort of religious material is in the novel. Because I think you can sort of read the novel with kind of ignoring that part of Pi or just looking at it as kind of a characteristic. But I do think it has a sort of larger context in relation to storytelling in general. So we'll talk a little bit about that before wrapping up our discussion of part one of Life of Pi. So on page 27, or chapter 7, we're first introduced to Pi's biology teacher, Mr. Kumar. There are actually two Mr. Kumars. This is one of the kind of coincidental, funny little details in part one, that there are two Mr. Kumars, one who is very religious, his Muslim kind of mentor figure, the baker, Mr. Kumar, but then there's the other Mr. Kumar, his biology teacher, who is an atheist, so he doesn't believe in God, and he's against religion, and he kind of really challenges Pi to view religion or a lack of belief in a more in full way, I guess. And he sort of confronts Pi with the other side of religion, which is a lack of belief. So Mr. Satish Kumar, Pi's biology teacher, he is more interested in sort of the science aspects of life. So he takes a kind of more practical approach to understanding the universe. And he doesn't see any point in believing in things that cannot be proven through science. So for him, religion doesn't really play a significant role in his life, and in fact, he considers himself an atheist. So Mr. Kumar's atheism is established when he visits the zoo and has a conversation with Pi. And I think it's sort of the first time Pi has ever met anybody who has completely no religion at all, and in fact doesn't believe in God, and views religion in a very negative light. So this is at the bottom of page 29, where Mr. Kumar says, religion. Mr. Kumar grinned broadly. I don't believe in religion. Religion is darkness. Pi has a hard time understanding that sentiment because he believes, religion is something beautiful and it adds to his worldview, and he sees it as anything but darkness. He sees it as light and giving and life. But for Mr. Kumar, who suffered greatly from polio when he was a child, he kind of lost any sense of religion in his life. And he believes that scientific reality is the only worldview that he wants or needs in life. So the experience of having polio really changed Mr. Kumar's perception of the world. So there's something about being sick and on his deathbed as a child that made him lose any sense of a higher power. So he says, when I was your age, this is page 30, sorry. When I was your age, I lived in bed racked with polio. I asked myself every day, where is God? Where is God? Where is God? God never came. It wasn't God who saved me, it was medicine. Reason is my prophet, and it tells me that as a watch stops, so we die. It's the end. If the watch doesn't work properly, it must be fixed here and now by us. One day we will take hold of the means of production, and there will be justice on earth. So Pi views this worldview as very bleak and rather sad, and he thought, what a terrible thing to have to lose one's faith in God through such horrible circumstances of being sick. Um, but Mr. Kumar also is Pi's friend, and he sees him as kind of also a bit of a mentor figure in terms of his appreciation of the natural world and science. And as we know, Pi will go on to study zoology, and so science is a huge part of Pi's worldview as well. So he kind of simultaneously believes in both the presence of God and counts on scientific reality as the kind of basis for understanding the world. So he doesn't see those two things as being incompatible, even though science is all about, seeing and observing proven things in the world around you, and a disbelief in anything that can't be proven through scientific research. And then religion is all about the opposite, which is, belief in things that you can't see or prove. It's just sort of having faith that, God or higher power exists. We can't really prove it. So while on the surface these two things are kind of incompatible, Pi seems to he doesn't see them as, a discrepancy or a contradiction, really. He sees the two things as being actually very compatible. And Pi sort of has stronger feelings, not for atheism. So he sees Mr. Kumar as almost somebody who still has a very strong belief system. It's just directed in the opposite direction, saying that God does not exist. And then Pi says something along the lines of who really sort of troubles him are the agnostics. So it's not atheists that bug Pi, it's agnostics, so people who doubt the presence of God or have no sense of one way or the other. Their worldview is just in the dark. They just have no idea and don't pick a side. So that's who really bothers Pi, and we can sort of think a little bit more. I think he's a little hard on agnosticism. Because it is, we probably all will go through a period in our lives where we question our belief system, whether we were, whatever religion you were raised, or whether you didn't have religion, or it's something that you question later in life. I think we all go through these periods where we question our worldview and our belief systems. So for Pi, he doesn't really have a lot of doubt in his belief in God, but I do think there is a room for skepticism as well within one's perception of the world. And he says on page 31, he talks about his view of agnostics. And he says, this is with Mr. Kumar. He says, I felt a kinship with him. It was my first clue that atheists are my brothers and sisters of a different faith, and every word they speak speaks of faith. Like me, they go as far as the legs of reason will carry them, and then they leap. I'll be honest about it. It's not atheists who get stuck in my craw, but agnostics. Doubt is useful for a while. We must all pass through the Garden of Gethsemane. If Christ played with doubt, so must we. If Christ spent an anguished night in prayer, if he burst out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me, then surely we are also permitted doubt. But we must move on. To choose doubt as a life or a philosophy of life is akin to choosing immobility as a means of transportation. So he sees there's sort of a need at some point in life to make a decision. Either you believe or you don't believe. There's no room for living in doubt for your whole life. You have to sort of pick a side. At least this is Pi's view of the world and of people. So I don't know, he's, very strong-minded in this regard, but I do think his view of atheism is particularly interesting, and how he sort of aligns himself with Mr. Kumar, who seems so different in terms of his scientific belief and his belief that religion is, not a good force in the world. So something to think about. So what role has religion played in Pi's life, and how important it is to his character and his views of belief and faith? So if we look a little closer at the definitions of atheism and agnosticism, I think we can sort of shed light on the larger implications of religion in Pye's story. So if we think about atheists, these are people who have faith that there is no God. So they strongly believe that there is no God and that when you die, you die. You're basically, worm food. Your body disintegrates and there is no heaven, no hell. It's just a process, the natural process of life and death. And we are basically just in the here and now. So they don't believe in God, they don't believe in an afterlife, and they think religion is actually, not a very good thing. It's can bring darkness and destruction and violence and cause all sorts of problems for society. So atheism is what his biology teacher believes. So he has a strong belief that there is no God. So he would be an atheist. And Pi disagrees with him, but at the same time respects how strong his biology teacher's views are. And he still sees him as kind of somebody who has a strong sense of worldview. Still believes in something, even if it's the negation of what Pi believes in, which is that God is everywhere and that religion is, light and life and everything positive in the world. So they're very divided in terms of their view of religion, but at the same time, they both have a sense of belief in something, even if that's either the lack of religion or faith in religion. So he sees atheism as not being separate or as opposite as himself, who's a believer in God. What really bugs Pi is agnostics. And agnostics are those people who doubt their beliefs in God, or they maintain a kind of limbo, gray area in regards to how they view the world. So maybe they think, maybe there's a God, maybe there's not, maybe we're all just, going to die one day and who knows what's going to happen. So they're very much just filled with kind of skepticism and doubt, and they kind of don't choose a strong position either way, whether there is a God or there's not, or they kind of just maintain this maybe, wishy-washy perception of the world. And this is what really bothers Pi about these people, is that they don't have a firm idea of how they view the world, and particularly the presence of God or not. So he really he struggles with those people who maintain their doubt throughout life and never really make a firm choice one way or the other. So he likes it when people have a strong sense of belief or faith in something, whether it's or faith in their beliefs one way or the other. So that's what Pi respects, and I think that's his problem with agnostics, is that rather than having faith in something, they just have doubt and skepticism. So that's where he sees that as not a very positive or helpful worldview to have. And you gain a stronger sense of Pi's views of atheism and agnosticism on page 69 and 70. And this is where our author is kind of intervening and observing Pi's storytelling, and then he's going to weigh in on his what he's observed about Pi and Pi's religious beliefs and how strongly Pi commits to this idea that God exists. So this is our author on chapter 21, bottom of page 69. He says, I am sitting in a downtown cafe after thinking. I've just spent most of an afternoon with him. Our encounters always leave me weary of the glum contentment that characterizes my life. What were those words he used that struck me? Ah, yes, dry, yeastless factuality, the better story. I take pen and paper out and write. Words of divine consciousness, moral exaltation, lasting feelings of elevation, elation, joy, a quickening of the moral sense which strikes one as more important than an intellectual understanding of things, an alignment of the universe along moral lines, not intellectual ones, a realization that the founding principle of existence is what we call love, which works itself out sometimes not clearly, not cleanly, not immediately, nonetheless eluctably. I pause. What of God's silence? I think it over. I add, an intellect confounded, yet a trusting sense of presence and ultimate purpose. So these are kind of the author's perceptions of pi, and he's kind of jotted down some words, understandings of pi's worldview. And for pi, it seems as if it's more important to have a kind of moral sense and believe in things that aren't provable, a sense of divine consciousness rather than just relying on one's intellect to understand the world. So pi is somebody who has a trusting sense of presence and ultimate purpose. So he trusts that there is a presence of God and that he has a purpose in life, basically. And then chapter 22 kind of develops some of these ideas in terms of pi's perception of having faith in God. And it says, I can well imagine an atheist's last words. So this is pi speaking again. He says, I can well imagine an atheist's last words. White, white, love, my God, and the deathbed leap of faith. Whereas the agnostic, if he stays true to his reasonable self, if he stays beholden to dry, yeastless factuality, might try to explain the warm light bathing him by saying, possibly of a failing oxygenation of the brain, and to the very end lack imagination and miss the better story. So this is a little puzzling for readers when you first read this chapter, because it's hard to sort of make sense of everything, the kind of mindset or pi's perception of the world and how religion plays such a strong role in it. But if we kind of take this apart a little bit and dissect some of what he's saying here, I think we get a better sense of pi's worldview. So he sees the atheist's last word. So the atheist who doesn't believe in God, but he can imagine that on his or her deathbed, the atheist is going to be able to make a kind of leap of faith and finally give in to the presence of love and God. So he sees the atheist as being somebody who has a strong enough sense of belief in something that he's going to be able to make that final leap into being a believer on his deathbed. So that's interesting. I don't know if that would be true or not, but it's kind of an interesting view of an atheist as having the potential to believe in something. Whereas the agnostic, who is full of doubt and skepticism, he's on the deathbed. They're just going to try to explain the white light of death. You know, we think of the white light that comes to us on our deathbed as being, you know, the presence of an afterlife or heaven or an angel. But for the agnostic who's just full of doubt and skepticism, it's just going to be a failure of oxygen to the brain. It's not this beautiful white light that embraces us in our last moment of life. It's just, oh, this is my brain dying. Whoops, okay, I'm dead. So there's kind of this, he sees the agnostic as being living a kind of worse life for being filled with doubt. And he actually uses the word dry, yeastless factuality to describe the agnostic's worldview. So dry, meaning dry and yeastless. Yeast, you know, would obviously be used to make bread rise, but it's something that grows and blooms and brings life to something. Rises, brings, you know, makes something rise and grow and expand. But to be dry and yeastless, meaning it's sort of stuck. or dead or barren, rather than something that blooms and grows and develops. So the factuality of the agnostic is really just dry, boring, and not a very expansive way of viewing the world. So he sees that person as not being able to take a leap of faith into believing in something that can't be proven. So he's saying agnostics lack imagination, they lack faith, and in a sense, they miss the larger beauty of life if you end up just doubting everything you see. So you miss the better story, the better version of reality or perception. Your worldview is darker and more depressing and colder and drier for lacking imagination, lacking faith in things you can't see. So it's an argument. It's an interesting way of viewing our perception of reality. I myself tend to be kind of, a realist, and I wouldn't say I'm not agnostic. I do have doubts here and there about these types of things, but I think that, having faith in things that you can't see, like love, maybe not religion, but love, I, believe in that kind of stuff. So there is this sense of imagination. You do invest your faith in things you can't prove or see. So I do think, all of us, we're capable of viewing life in a way that's, more fuller, that's more colorful, more imaginative, and full of faith in things, not necessarily religion, but full of faith in things we can't always see. So I think he's really pushing us to be full of faith, whether you direct that in terms of religion and spirituality or in other kind of abstract beliefs in love or life or karma, whatever you want to call it. This is where he's saying people should have a sense of imagination and belief in the unknown. Not everything has to be proven, and you don't have to live that dry, cold, yeastless, faithless life. There are other options. So that's Pi's sort of worldview in a nutshell in that chapter. And we'll get a sense as the story goes on that he wants us to think about how our perception of reality of life is colored by our ability to have faith in things that we can't see or that seem bizarre or are unknowable or unprovable through science or through our rational minds. He wants us to have that, as readers, to have that leap of faith and really follow along, believing in his story that just takes us into bizarre and weird places. So that's part of our challenge as readers, is to keep going with this narrative and follow Pi through all his various adventures and really take a leap of faith as things get more strange and bizarre as the story goes on.